It's Cathy Cena here with Tri-Cities Community TV. It's my pleasure to interview the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Scheer. Welcome to the studio here today, and we really appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks very much, Cathy. It's a great opportunity to sit down and visit.
So you've had some change lately. What's it like going from Canada's youngest speaker to Leader of the Opposition? Share a little bit of that with us.
Sure, it's a very big change. Speaker of the House of Commons is a nonpartisan role where the responsibility is to make sure the rules are being applied, not to get into the debates or make political speeches, but just to make sure that the Parliament works and that the House of Commons is there for all political parties and all Canadians. It's also a very isolating job because there's not really a caucus around the Speaker. The Speaker has a couple of deputy speakers, but other than that, it's really just you're kind of out there on your own. And getting back into the caucus side of things, after the last election, I became House Leader for the Conservative Party. And that was a tremendous opportunity to get kind of back into the political side of things. Now, leading the team, it's a huge honor. It's an amazing responsibility, and I'm really enjoying it. So there was a bit of a transition. When I was Speaker, I kind of had to kind of flip a switch and put all the political and partisan things aside.
Yes.
And now I'm back to fighting for issues that I care about, back to leading a team of people that are offering substantive policy ideas to Canadians, and it's a much different role entirely, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
That sounds fantastic. I did watch you all the way through to being elected, so congratulations. A little late, but nonetheless. As Leader of the Opposition, what's your biggest criticism of the government?
Just the complete lack of responsibility. Everything that goes wrong in this government, that they blame on other people. You know, every time that there's a failure to get a pipeline built or a ruling that they've mishandled something, they always try to look to other governments for the blame. And then a lack of responsibility in terms of offloading onto future generations the cost of the policies today. So this year, for example, with multi-billion-dollar deficits adding to our debt, I've got kids, I've got 5 children, they're going to have to pay that back. That's not being responsible. We're all brought up to take responsibility for our own actions, to save for ourselves, to pay our debts. I don't think it's fair when a government reaches into the future and takes future prosperity from future generations of Canadians to be spent today. So an overall lack of responsibility is my biggest criticism in general, and there's lots of specifics I could go into.
Right, we could be here for days. The Tri-Cities is passionate about protecting its environment, and the Conservatives are criticized quite a bit about being against the carbon tax and being for our pipeline development. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we separate the carbon tax from an environmental agenda because there is no link between a carbon tax and improving the quality of air or reducing emissions. It is just another source of revenue. So I don't accept the premise that the two are linked. You can be against the carbon tax and for a responsible policy on the environment. And that's precisely where we're at. We are committed to repealing the Liberal carbon tax while at the same time improving standards for everything from wastewater to cleaning up soil to reducing particulate matter in the atmosphere and, of course, lowering emissions. When it comes to pipelines are actually a way that we can help improve the environment, getting oil and gas off of rails, displacing foreign oil. Right now, we have Eastern Canada dependent on foreign oil. And when that oil and gas gets extracted in Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Venezuela, they don't have the same environmental standards we do. So by building Energy East, we would bring Western Canadian energy to Eastern Canadian markets, get us off foreign oil, and make sure that that energy is developed in a very responsible way.
Well, you have some strong roots in Saskatchewan, and by marriage, so do I. I'd like to know how many times you've been to Swift Current.
Stopped off a few times on the drive to Calgary. Not as often as I'd like, but we've done the drive from Saskatchewan to Alberta a few times.
Yes.
Along the number 1, of course. And we live in Regina, so we do a lot of traveling in my riding, Regina Capel, Saskatoon, of course. Yes. And Moose Jaw the odd time. There's a lovely spa there.
There's a lovely spa in Moose Jaw?
I'll
have to have my husband take me there next time.
Well, I went there for my honeymoon with Jill, so...
well, that's good. That's very, very good. As you can see, there's a lot of construction, and the Tri-Cities are booming, and there's a lot of growth here. How would your government ensure that we get the right infrastructure that we need?
Well, that is a tremendous concern. The quality of life issues around people living in major centers is very significant. Coming from Regina, where it takes 15 minutes to get pretty much anywhere, I've really learned a lot about that throughout my travels, going through Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, in large cities, people lose hours out of their day just sitting in traffic. And so infrastructure is very important. Obviously, wastewater treatment and water capacity to allow cities to continue to grow in an environmentally responsible way is also important. The previous Conservative government had the most ambitious infrastructure plan since World War II called Building Canada, and we allowed local municipalities to identify their priorities, and then we funded those. And that's exactly the path that I would follow. But I also want to make sure that there's a proper balance in infrastructure spending. Yes, water is important. Yes, public transit is important, but so too is vehicular traffic too. A lot of people just need to drive their cars, and we need to make sure that that's part of the equation as well. So bridges and expansions on main thoroughfares, that has to be part of the overall equation as well.
Great. There's a large community of hunting and shooting enthusiasts here. The PDHFC, the Vancouver Gun Range. The current government is proposing a handgun ban, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it won't work, and you don't have to take my word for it. The police chiefs from across Canada are speaking out saying this is going to be ineffective, it's going to be very costly. We saw how expensive the previous Liberal gun registry was, took valuable resources away from law enforcement and programs that actually lead to safer streets, and spent it on bureaucracy. It's really lazy government to ask people who follow the laws to follow more laws. It's a lot tougher to get criminals who don't worry about any of the laws off the street. Right now, the people who are using firearms in criminal acts, whether it's dealing drugs or other things, they're not worried about getting permits, not worried about whether or not they're breaking a firearms law. They're already breaking the law. They are already engaged in criminal activity. Our approach would be much more effective. Getting illegal guns off the streets by increased tools at the border, because a lot of them do get trafficked in from other countries, and more meaningful sentences for dangerous and repeat offenders. Those are what we hear from police officers from across the country. That would actually have a meaningful impact.
Now, lastly, as you travel across Canada, what's one thing that you would like Canadians to know about you, Mr. Scheer?
I want them to know that I have a background that's very, very typical. I grew up in a very middle-class family. My mother was a nurse. My dad worked at a newspaper. We had to make some tough choices as a family. We didn't own a car growing up. It was a financial decision that my parents had to make. They just couldn't afford to have one. A lot of families have that exact same type of dynamic. I didn't inherit a family fortune or a trust fund to pay my way through university. I had to go out and work in a small business. So through that, I believe I have a much better understanding of the challenges that Canadians face, and our government, our party, will always be looking at policies that make it more affordable to live, make it easier for small businesses to expand and hire, because that's where the jobs and opportunity come from. So knowing that that is a part of who I am and a part of my background, I believe will make me very well suited to be Prime Minister.
Well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate your time today, and I wish you all the best, and we look forward to you becoming Prime Minister.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.